The gallows were nearly ready as the sun dipped low over Gonzales, Texas in 1873. Violet Zimmer stood with her wrists bound, chin high despite the tears that threatened to spill from her emerald eyes. The crowd that had gathered around the town square spat curses at her feet, their faces contorted with hatred and fear. "Witch," a woman shrieked from the edge of the crowd. "She hexed my boy, made him sick with her evil potions." Sheriff Holt adjusted his belt, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Miss Zimmer, you've been found guilty of practicing witchcraft against the good people of Gonzales. Tomorrow at dawn you'll hang for your crimes." Violet's voice remained steady despite her trembling hands. "I am no witch. I am a healer, nothing more." The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, angrier. Mothers clutched their children close, men gripped their hats in white-knuckled fists. 3 deaths in as many weeks, all young men who'd taken ill after drinking Violet's remedies. No one cared that she'd saved countless others with the same treatments. No one remembered the fevers she'd broken, the wounds she'd mended, the babies she'd helped bring safely into the world. "Take her away," Sheriff Holt commanded his deputy, "and make sure she stays locked up tight. Don't want any of her magic tricks helping her escape." As the deputy roughly grabbed Violet's arm, a voice cut through the crowd like a knife. "Wait." The crowd parted as if by the command itself, revealing a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. Zachary Owens stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt loops, the silver star of a Texas Ranger catching the last golden rays of daylight. His dark eyes surveyed the scene with quiet intensity, taking in the makeshift gallows, the trembling woman, the bloodthirsty crowd. "This how justice works in Gonzales these days, Sheriff," his voice carried across the square, hushing the mob. "Trial by gossip and fear," Sheriff Holt's face reddened. "This ain't your jurisdiction, Ranger Owens. We handle our own problems here." Zachary moved forward, each step deliberate, his spurs jingling softly against the hard-packed earth. "Seems to me your problem is about to get a whole lot worse if you hang an innocent woman." "She ain't innocent," someone called from the crowd. "She's a witch." Zachary's gaze never left the sheriff. "That's so." He finally turned to look at Violet, taking in her dirt-smudged face, her simple dress, the defiant set of her jaw despite the fear in her eyes. "And what proof do you have of these accusations?" The townsfolk began shouting all at once, a cacophony of claims and accusations. Zachary raised his hand, silencing them. "If she's truly a witch," he said, his voice carrying to the farthest edges of the square, "then cast your spell on me alone." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The sheriff stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "What are you doing, Ranger?" Zachary stepped closer to Violet, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. "I'm making a proposition. This woman remains in my custody. If she's truly a witch, let her hex me instead of the town, and if no harm comes to me, you let her go." "And if you die like the others," the sheriff challenged, a ghost of a smile played across Zachary's lips. "Then you'll have your proof, won't you?" He turned back to Violet. "What do you say, miss? Care to try your magic on me?" Violet stared at the ranger, this stranger who had just offered himself as sacrifice. "I have no magic," she whispered, "only knowledge of plants and healing." "Then we have nothing to fear," Zachary replied, loud enough for all to hear. He turned back to the sheriff. "Cut her loose, she's coming with me." The sheriff hesitated, his hand hovering near his gun. "The people want justice." "What the people want is a scapegoat," Zachary countered. "And I won't stand by and watch it happen, unless you plan to arrest a Texas Ranger too." For a tense moment, no one moved, then Sheriff Holt nodded to his deputy. "Cut her loose." As the ropes fell from Violet's wrists, the crowd rumbled with discontent. Zachary placed a protective hand on her back, guiding her toward his horse. "You're making a powerful enemy today, Ranger," the sheriff called after them. Zachary helped Violet onto his horse before mounting behind her. "Wouldn't be the first time," he replied, then urged his horse forward, away from the angry faces and the half-built gallows. Violet sat rigid in front of him, not daring to believe this reprieve was real. As they left the town behind, she finally spoke. Why would you do this for a stranger?" Zachary's voice was quiet near her ear. Because I've seen what fear does to good people, and I've seen innocent blood spilled because of it. I won't let it happen again. They'll come after us, she said. They believe I killed those boys. Did you? His question was direct, without accusation. No. She twisted slightly to meet his eyes. I tried to save them. They were already sick when they came to me. Zachary nodded, as if her answer confirmed something he already knew. Then we'll figure out what really happened, but first we need to get somewhere safe. As they rode into the gathering darkness, Violet wondered what twist of fate had sent this man to save her, and whether his intervention would truly be her salvation or merely delay the inevitable. Behind them, the lights of Gonzales faded, and ahead lay only uncertainty. The moon rose high as they continued riding, putting as much distance as possible between them and the vengeful town. Violet had fallen silent, exhaustion and the gentle rhythm of the horse lulling her into a daze. Zachary's arm remained steady around her waist, keeping her secure against him as they navigated the rugged terrain. "There's a place up ahead," he finally said, breaking the long silence. "An old line shack I've used before. We can rest there for the night." Violet nodded, too weary to speak. When they reached the small wooden structure nestled among a stand of oak trees, she nearly fell from the horse. Zachary caught her easily, helping her to the ground. "Been a while since I've seen a person so ready to collapse," he commented, tying his horse to a post before leading Violet inside. The shack was simple, one room with a small fireplace, a narrow bed pushed against the wall, and a rickety table with a single chair. Dust covered every surface, but it was shelter. "Not much, but it'll keep us dry if it rains," Zachary said, setting down his saddlebags. Violet stood awkwardly in the center of the room, suddenly aware of her situation alone in a remote cabin with a man she'd met only hours ago. No matter that he'd saved her from the gallows, she knew better than to trust too easily. Zachary seemed to sense her unease. "You take the bed." "I'll sleep by the fire." "Why did you really help me?" Violet asked, finding her voice at last. "The truth this time." Zachary struck a match, lighting a small oil lamp on the table. In the soft glow, his features appeared less severe, though no less striking. "Those men who died, there was something strange about it. 3 young men, all from prominent families, all dead within weeks of each other, and all supposedly after taking your remedies." "You don't believe I killed them," she said, a statement rather than a question. "I've been tracking something across 3 counties," he replied, removing his hat and placing it on the table. "Mysterious deaths always blamed on someone on the fringes of society. A Mexican peddler in San Antonio, a freed slave in Columbus, and now you." Violet sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "You think they're connected?" "I think someone is clever enough to use superstition as a cover for murder." Zachary knelt by the fireplace, arranging kindling and wood from a small stack in the corner. "And I think you were about to become the next victim, not just the next scapegoat." The fire caught, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Violet watched him, this strange man who had risked everything on a hunch. "How can you be so sure I'm innocent?" Zachary sat back on his heels, studying the growing flames. "I'm not. But I've been a ranger long enough to trust my instincts, and my instincts say you're no killer." "I'm a healer," she said quietly. "My mother taught me, and her mother before her. We use plants, herbs. Knowledge passed down through generations. Some call it witchcraft, but it's just science they don't understand." "Where is your family now?" The question sent a pang through her heart. "Gone. My mother died 2 years ago. Father left when I was small. No siblings." Zachary nodded slowly. "Makes you an easy target. No one to defend you. Except, apparently, a Texas Ranger with unusual instincts." The ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Get some rest," he said, standing and unrolling a bedroll near the fire. "Tomorrow we need to figure out what really happened to those men." Violet didn't think she could sleep, but exhaustion claimed her almost as soon as she lay down, still fully clothed atop the rough blanket. Her last conscious thought was of the strange turn her life had taken from condemned witch to the protected charge of a lawman in the span of a single day. She woke to sunlight streaming through the single dirty window and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then it all came rushing back: the accusations, the gallows, the Ranger's intervention. Zachary stood by the small fireplace, pouring coffee into a tin cup. He'd already been up for some time, judging by the freshly chopped wood stacked neatly by the door. "Morning," he said, glancing up as she stirred. "Sleep well." "Better than I expected to," she admitted, sitting up and smoothing her rumpled dress. Her hair had come loose from its pins, falling in dark waves around her shoulders. He handed her the cup of coffee. "Thought you might need this. It's not great, but it's hot." She accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the warm metal. "Thank you, not just for the coffee," he nodded, pouring a cup for himself. "We need to talk about what happened in Gonzales. I need to know everything about those men who died." Violet took a sip of the coffee, strong and bitter, but as he'd said, hot. "Thomas Miller came to me first about a month ago, said he had stomach pains. I gave him chamomile and peppermint tea, told him to avoid alcohol for a while. And he seemed better for a few days. Then his father found him dead in bed. After that, John Peterson came to me with similar symptoms. I tried a different remedy, thinking perhaps Thomas had been allergic to something in my first treatment. John died 3 days later, and the third." Zachary leaned against the wall, watching her carefully. "William Cooper. He came to me already looking half dead, sweating, pale, said he had the same pains as the others. She hesitated. "I tried to tell him to see the town doctor instead, but he insisted, said the doctor was too expensive. I gave him willow bark tea for the pain and ginger for his stomach. He died that night." Zachary considered this information. All three were young men, friends. Violet nodded. "All about 20 years old. They ran together, yes, always at Donahue's saloon, gambling and drinking." "Tell me about their families." "Thomas's father owns the bank. John's family has the largest cattle ranch outside of town. William's father is the mayor." She looked up at Zachary, understanding dawning. "The most powerful families in Gonzales, exactly." Zachary set his cup down. "Did you keep any of your remedies, the ones you gave them?" "No, the sheriff confiscated everything from my home after William died." "We need to go back," Zachary said, his decision made. "Not into town, not yet, but to where you gather your herbs. I want to see exactly what you used in those remedies." Violet stood, setting her cup aside. "That's at least half a day's ride from here, and what if someone from town sees us? It's a risk we'll have to take." Zachary began gathering his things. "Because right now, the only way to clear your name is to find out what really killed those men." They set out after a quick breakfast of dried beef and hardtack from Zachary's provisions. The day was clear and bright, the spring air fragrant with wildflowers. Under different circumstances, Violet might have enjoyed the ride, seated in front of Zachary on his sturdy bay horse. As it was, each mile brought a mixture of dread and determination. "Tell me about yourself," Zachary said as they rode. "How did a young woman end up living alone, practicing medicine in a town like Gonzales?" Violet considered how much to share. "My mother was a midwife. We traveled from town to town when I was young, never staying long in one place. Then she got sick. We settled in Gonzales because she was too weak to travel anymore. And after she died, I stayed, built a little practice helping women with childbirth, mixing remedies for common ailments. Most people were grateful, or at least accepting, until recently." "What changed?" Violet sighed. "Progress, I suppose. A real doctor moved to town last year, Dr. Harrison Reeves. Harvard-educated with proper medical instruments and fancy certificates. Suddenly my methods seemed primitive, suspicious." Zachary's arms tightened slightly around her as they navigated a steep incline. "This doctor. Reeves, was he treating the young men who died?" "No," Violet replied. "That's what was strange. He pronounced them dead but claimed he'd never seen them as patients." "Interesting," Zachary murmured, his breath warm against her hair. They rode in silence for some time after that, each lost in their own thoughts. When they finally stopped to rest the horse at a small creek, Violet slid to the ground, stretching her stiff muscles. "We're getting close to my gathering places," she said, watching as Zachary knelt by the water, splashing his face. "Another hour, perhaps," he nodded, wiping the water from his face with his sleeve. "Good." Will a crack of gunfire interrupted him, the bullet splintering bark from a tree inches from Violet's head. Zachary moved with lightning speed, tackling her to the ground and rolling them both behind a large boulder. "Stay down," he hissed, drawing his revolver. Another shot rang out, ricocheting off the rock above them. Zachary peered carefully around the edge, then ducked back as a third bullet came dangerously close. "One shooter," he said quietly. "About 100 yards up on that ridge." Violet's heart hammered in her chest. "Someone from town." "Maybe, whoever it is, they're not a very good shot, which is lucky for us." He checked his ammunition, then glanced at her. "When I give the signal, I want you to run for those trees. Don't stop, don't look back. I'll be right behind you," she nodded, too terrified to speak. "Now." Zachary fired 2 quick shots toward the ridge, providing cover as Violet scrambled to her feet and ran for the tree line. She heard more gunfire behind her but didn't turn, focusing only on reaching the safety of the dense woods. Once among the trees, she pressed her back against a thick trunk, breathing heavily. Moments later, Zachary appeared beside her, his expression grim. "They're gone," he said. "Rode off when they realized they'd lost the advantage." "Who would?" Violet began, then stopped as she noticed the blood staining Zachary's sleeve. "You're hit." He glanced at his arm as if noticing the wound for the first time. "Just a graze. I've had worse shaving." Despite his dismissal, Violet moved closer, gently pushing up his sleeve to examine the injury. The bullet had indeed only grazed him, leaving a shallow furrow across his upper arm. "This needs cleaning," she said, her healer's instincts taking over. "We're near my gathering place." "I can treat it there." Zachary didn't argue, which told Violet the wound bothered him more than he let on. They moved cautiously through the woods, Zachary leading the horse and scanning for any signs of pursuit. Violet guided them to a small, hidden valley where a clear stream wound between stands of various plants. "This is it," she said. "My garden, as I call it. Everything I need grows within these few acres." While Zachary secured the horse and kept watch, Violet quickly gathered what she needed: yarrow to stop bleeding, plantain leaves to draw out impurities, and juniper berries to prevent infection. At the stream, she washed the plants thoroughly, then crushed them between 2 smooth stones. "Sit," she instructed, returning to where Zachary stood vigilant at the edge of the clearing. He complied without comment, settling on a fallen log while she knelt beside him. Gently, she cleaned the wound with water from her canteen, then applied the poultice of crushed herbs. Zachary winced slightly but remained still as she worked. "This is what I do," she said softly. "I heal, I don't harm." Zachary watched her hands as they moved efficiently, wrapping a strip of clean cloth torn from her petticoat around his arm. "I believe you." His simple statement, spoken with such certainty, brought unexpected tears to Violet's eyes. She blinked them away, focusing on securing the bandage. "There, it should heal cleanly if we change the dressing regularly." "Thank you." Zachary flexed his arm carefully. "Now, show me the plants you used for those remedies you gave the young men." Violet led him around the small valley, pointing out each plant and explaining its properties. Chamomile for calming and easing stomach discomfort, peppermint also for digestion issues. Willow bark for pain, it's what the doctor's aspirin powder is derived from, ginger root for nausea. Zachary examined each plant carefully. "Nothing here that could cause death if prepared properly? No, these are all gentle remedies. Even if I made a mistake in preparation, the worst that should happen would be ineffectiveness or perhaps some discomfort." She hesitated, then added, "There are dangerous plants in these woods: foxglove, nightshade, water hemlock, but I know them well and would never confuse them with my healing herbs." Zachary knelt by the stream, deep in thought. Someone wanted those men dead and wanted you blamed for it. The shooter today confirms that someone doesn't want us figuring this out. "But who?" Violet asked, sitting beside him. "And why those particular men? That's what we need to find out." Zachary looked at her, his dark eyes intense. "Are you willing to go back to Gonzales? It will be dangerous." Violet thought of the half-built gallows, the hateful faces of people she'd once called neighbors. Then she thought of spending the rest of her life running, always looking over her shoulder, never clearing her name. "Yes," she said firmly, I'm not a witch or a murderer. I won't let them make me one. Zachary's expression softened, and for the first time, Violet saw something like admiration in his eyes. You're braver than most men I've ridden with, Violet Zimmer. The use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. Does this mean you'll continue protecting me, Ranger Owens? A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. Call me Zachary, and yes, I believe I will. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they gathered what herbs Violet thought might be useful and prepared to leave the valley. The knowledge that someone had tracked them, had tried to kill them, hung over them like a storm cloud. But alongside the fear was a growing resolve, and between them, the first tenuous threads of trust. They decided to make camp for the night rather than risk traveling in darkness with a shooter possibly still tracking them. Zachary found a defensible position, a small cave set into a rocky hillside that offered both shelter and a clear view of the approach. While he built a small, nearly smokeless fire at the mouth of the cave, Violet sorted through the plants she'd gathered, bundling them carefully and storing them in the pockets of her dress. You never did tell me your story, she said, watching him work. How does a man become a Texas Ranger? Zachary fed another small stick to the fire. Same way anyone finds their path, I suppose. Circumstance, choice, a bit of luck, good and bad. When he didn't elaborate, Violet pressed gently, that's not much of an answer. He glanced up at her, a wry smile crossing his face. No, I suppose it's not. He sat back on his heels, considering. My father was a ranger, died when I was 15, ambushed by cattle rustlers near the Rio Grande. I joined up 5 years later thinking I'd find the men responsible. Did you? No. Found out later they'd been killed in a saloon fight in Lerdo a month after my father died. His voice was matter of fact, but Violet sensed the old disappointment beneath the words. By then, I'd discovered I had a talent for the work, tracking, reading people, solving puzzles. Like the puzzle of who killed those 3 young men, exactly like that. Zachary checked his pistol, a habit Violet had noticed he performed frequently. What about you? Always wanted to be a healer, Violet smiled softly. I can't remember ever wanting to be anything else. My earliest memories are of helping my mother prepare remedies, learning which plants to gather and when. She used to say we had the gift of healing in our blood. Is that what some people mistook for witchcraft, this gift, perhaps? She twisted a sprig of lavender between her fingers. Or perhaps it was simply that we were different. My mother and I kept to ourselves, helped people when asked but never quite belonged. People fear what they don't understand. Fear makes men dangerous, Zachary agreed. I've seen it turn ordinary, decent folks into monsters. Like the people of Gonzales. There was no bitterness in her question, only sadness. Some of them, maybe, but I think there's more to this story. Zachary stood, stretching his tall frame. Tomorrow we'll head back toward town, but carefully. I want to ask some questions at the Double Cross. The Double Cross, roadhouse about 5 miles outside Gonzales. Rough place, but the kind where people talk if you know how to listen. The fire crackled between them, casting flickering shadows across the cave walls. Outside, night had fully descended, bringing with it a chorus of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. You should rest, Zachary said, nodding toward the back of the cave where he'd laid out his bedroll. I'll take first watch. Violet wanted to protest, to insist she could take a turn standing guard, but exhaustion was settling into her bones. Wake me for the second watch. Your arm needs rest too, he nodded, though they both knew he probably wouldn't wake her. As she settled onto the bedroll, she watched him silhouette against the dying fire, steady and vigilant. For the first time since the accusations had begun, she felt something like hope. Zachary, she said softly. He turned slightly, acknowledging her. Thank you. For believing in me when no one else would. In the dim light, she couldn't see his expression, but his voice was gentle when he replied, Get some sleep, Violet. Tomorrow will come soon enough. Dawn broke clear and cold, mist clinging to the valleys below their hillside position. Violet woke to find Zachary already awake, watching the sunrise with a cup of coffee in hand. You didn't wake me, she said, sitting up and pushing her hair from her face. You needed the rest. He handed her a cup of coffee without looking at her. We both did. Something in his tone made her study him more carefully. "You saw something during the night." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "Riders, 3 of them, checking the valley where we were yesterday. They didn't come this way, but they're looking." The sheriff's men. Zachary shook his head. Couldn't tell from this distance, but they weren't wearing badges, at least not visibly. They packed up camp quickly, erasing all signs of their presence before setting off. Instead of taking the direct route toward town, Zachary led them on a circuitous path, frequently doubling back or stopping to listen for pursuit. By midday, they could see smoke from chimneys in the distance, not Gonzales proper, but the scattered homesteads that surrounded it. Zachary guided them toward a dense copse of trees overlooking a dusty road. "The double cross is just beyond that bend," he said, pointing. "We'll wait until dusk. Less chance of being recognized if we arrive when it's busy." They settled in to wait, sharing the last of Zachary's jerky and hardtack. The hours passed slowly, the spring sun warm on their faces as they watched occasional travelers pass on the road below. "Tell me about the doctor," Zachary said eventually. "This Harvard man who came to Gonzales." Violet considered the question. Dr. Reeves arrived about a year ago, set up a proper practice with an examination room and everything. At first, people were skeptical. Most folks in Gonzales aren't used to paying cash money for medical care. They'd trade goods or services with me or with old Dr. Matthews before he died. But they came around to the new doctor. The wealthy families did, yes. There's a certain prestige in saying your family is treated by a Harvard graduate, and he is skilled, I'll grant him that. Set Tom Wilson's broken leg better than I could have, saved Mrs. Abernathy when her childbirth went wrong. Did he ever express any hostility toward you? Competition for patients, perhaps? Violet shook her head. Not openly. He was always polite when our paths crossed, even consulted me once about local herbs when his medicine supplies were running low during the winter. But, Zachary prompted, there was always something cold about him, calculating. She frowned, trying to articulate her impression. As if he was always thinking 3 steps ahead in a game only he knew the rules to. Zachary nodded thoughtfully. And his relationship with the 3 young men who died. I don't know that there was one, beyond the usual doctor-patient relationship. Though Thomas Miller's father is on the town council and helped fund the doctor's new practice building. They fell silent as a wagon rumbled by on the road below, the driver whistling tunelessly. When it had passed, Zachary spoke again. "When we go to the double cross, let me do the talking. These places have their own rules, their own language. You keep your head down, stay close to me." Violet bristled slightly at being treated as helpless. "I can take care of myself." "I don't doubt it," Zachary said, his eyes softening. "But right now, half the county thinks you're a witch who murdered 3 men. The less attention you draw, the better." She couldn't argue with his logic, much as she wanted to. As the sun began to set, they prepared to make their way to the roadhouse. Zachary gave her his spare shirt to wear over her dress, too large, but it helped disguise her feminine silhouette. She tucked her hair up under his hat, completing the rudimentary disguise. "You'll pass for a young man at a distance or in poor light," Zachary said, assessing her. "Just don't speak if you can help it." The double cross lived up to its rough reputation. A ramshackle 2-story building with a sagging porch, it glowed with the warm light of oil lamps and rang with raucous laughter and tinny piano music. Horses and wagons crowded the hitching posts outside, and the smell of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed bodies wafted into the twilight. Zachary tied his horse at the edge of the property, away from the other mounts. "Stay close," he reminded Violet, "and keep your hat low." They entered the crowded main room, Violet a half-step behind Zachary, her eyes wide beneath the brim of his hat. The room was hazy with smoke, packed with cowboys, travelers, and local farmers letting off steam. In one corner, a bearded man played a lively tune on an upright piano while a heavily rouged woman sang along, her voice strong despite the competing noise. Zachary made his way to the bar, positioning himself so that Violet was protected between his body and the rough wooden counter. The bartender, a bald man with enormous mutton chop whiskers, approached with a questioning look. Whiskey, Zachary said. 2. He placed coins on the bar. The bartender nodded, returning moments later with 2 glasses of amber liquid. Zachary took a small sip of his, then leaned in as if confiding something to the bartender. Heard there was some excitement over in Gonzales, something about a witch. The bartender glanced at Violet but seemed to see only a young man in poor light. That business with the Zimmer woman. Yeah, word travels fast. They were set to hang her, but some ranger took her away. Sheriff's fit to be tied about it. Ranger, huh? Zachary took another casual sip. What'd she do that got her accused of witchcraft, killed 3 young fellas with her potions? At least that's what they're saying. The bartender leaned in conspiratorially. Between you and me, those boys were no angels, always in here causing trouble, drinking too much, picking fights. That's so, Zachary feigned casual interest. Regulars were they. Every Friday and Saturday night like clockwork. Miller, Peterson, and Cooper, sons of the richest men in the county, throwing their money around like they printed it themselves. The bartender spat into a nearby spittoon. No respect, those boys, but they didn't deserve what happened to them. And what exactly did happen? Story gets jumbled in the telling. The bartender wiped the counter with a dirty rag. Got sick, one after the other. Started with stomach pains, then fever, then. He made a slashing gesture across his throat. Dead within days. All of them had been to see that Zimmer woman for remedies. Strange coincidence, Zachary commented. No coincidence, according to Sheriff Holt. Said she hexed him, though why she'd pick those 3. The bartender shrugged. Violet shifted uncomfortably beside Zachary, and he placed a warning hand on her arm. Anyone else come around asking about those boys? Zachary asked. Before they died, I mean. The bartender's eyes narrowed slightly. Why all the questions, Mr. Ulaw? Zachary smiled disarmingly. Just curious, passing through, heard the gossip. Strange story, that's all. After a moment, the bartender seemed to accept this. Now that you mention it, there was a fella, well-dressed city type, came in a few times when the boys were here, bought them drinks once or twice. Remember his name? Nah, kept to himself mostly, though. The bartender frowned, trying to recall. Think he might have been that new doctor from town, Reeves or something like that. Violet tensed beside Zachary, but he kept his expression neutral. Doctors don't usually hang around places like this. That's why it stuck in my mind. Seemed out of place. The bartender was called away by another customer, ending their conversation. Zachary guided Violet to a dark corner where they could speak without being overheard. Did you know Reeves spent time with those men here? She shook her head, her eyes wide beneath the hat brim. Never. Why would a respectable doctor socialize with young troublemakers in a place like this? Good question. Zachary's eyes scanned the room. And here's another one. Why is he here tonight? Violet followed his gaze to the far side of the room, where Dr. Harrison Reeves sat at a table, deep in conversation with a rough-looking man Violet didn't recognize. The doctor was impeccably dressed as always, his trimmed beard and spectacles giving him an air of scholarly authority that seemed wildly out of place in the rowdy establishment. We need to leave, Zachary said quietly, before he notices us. They slipped out the side door, staying in the shadows as they made their way back to their horse. Once they were safely away from the roadhouse, Violet finally spoke. He knew them. He was socializing with them before they died. And he never mentioned it when they turned up dead, Zachary added. That's significant. But what does it mean? Why would a doctor poison his own patients? Zachary helped her mount the horse before swinging up behind her. I don't know yet, but I intend to find out. We need to get into town, talk to the families of those boys. That's impossible, Violet protested. Everyone in Gonzales knows my face, and yours now too. Not impossible, Zachary replied, just difficult, and we won't be going as ourselves. The plan Zachary outlined as they rode was daring, perhaps even foolhardy. But as dawn broke the next day and they prepared to put it into action, Violet had to admit it might just work. They'd spent the night in an abandoned trapper's cabin Zachary knew of, planning their approach. Now, dressed in clothes they'd borrowed from a washing line, leaving coins in exchange. They looked markedly different from the ranger and the accused witch who'd fled Gonzales. Violet wore a simple but respectable dress and a bonnet that shadowed her face. Her hair was styled differently, pulled severely back into a bun instead of her usual loose waves. Zachary had shaved his 3-day stubble and wore wire-rimmed spectacles and a storekeeper's suit that was slightly too small for his frame, making him appear bookish rather than commanding. "Remember, you're Mrs. Caroline Wilson, my sister-in-law from San Antonio," Zachary reminded her. "We're looking to open a dry goods store and want to speak with the prominent citizens about the business climate. And you're Walter Wilson, recently widowed shopkeeper from Houston," Violet recited. She adjusted her bonnet nervously. "Do you really think this will work? People see what they expect to see," Zachary replied. "No one's looking for a Texas Ranger in spectacles or an accused witch in a respectable bonnet. As long as we don't draw undue attention, we should be fine." They entered Gonzales from the north, opposite from the direction they'd fled days earlier. The town was bustling with morning activity wagons delivering goods to stores, women shopping, men going about their business. No one gave them a second glance as they made their way to the town's small hotel. At the hotel desk, Zachary put on a slight Eastern accent as he requested 2 rooms for himself and his sister-in-law. The clerk, a young man who looked half asleep, barely glanced at them as he handed over the keys. "Our first visit is to the bank," Zachary said once they were alone in the hotel corridor. "Thomas Miller's father should be there. I want to see his reaction when we mention his son." Horace Miller, president of the Gonzales County Bank, was a corpulent man with mutton chop whiskers and an air of self-importance. He received them in his private office, clearly intrigued by the prospect of new business in town. "Gonzales is growing rapidly," he boasted, leaning back in his leather chair. "A new dry goods store would do well here, especially with the railroad spur coming next year." "That's encouraging to hear," Zachary replied in his Walter Wilson persona. "Though we did hear some troubling rumors about recent unpleasantness in town, something about deaths and witchcraft." Miller's florid face darkened. "Unfortunate business. My son was one of the victims." "Oh my," Violet said softly. "How terrible for you." "What happened, if you don't mind my asking?" For a moment, Violet thought Miller might refuse to discuss it. Then, perhaps seeing an opportunity to gain sympathy from potential business associates, he sighed heavily. "My boy, Thomas, was poisoned by a woman who claimed to be a healer. 2 other fine young men as well, all within weeks of each other. The witch fled justice with the help of some meddling ranger, but Sheriff Holt will find them." "How dreadful," Violet murmured, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Was your son ill before this? Poisoning?" Miller frowned slightly. "Not particularly. He mentioned some stomach discomfort, but nothing serious. That's why he went to the witch in the first place, said the doctor was too expensive." He snorted, "As if I wouldn't have paid for proper medical care." "Did the doctor examine your son after he died?" Zachary asked. "Dr. Reeves?" "Yes, of course. He confirmed it was poison, some plant-based toxin the witch used. Said there was nothing he could have done even if Thomas had come to him first." Miller's eyes grew suspiciously moist. "My only son. His mother never recovered from the shock. She's been bedridden since it happened." "We're so very sorry for your loss," Violet said, and despite everything, she meant it. Whatever the truth of Thomas Miller's death, his father's grief was genuine. As they left the bank, Zachary guided Violet across the street to a small cafe. "We need to speak with the other families," he said quietly. "And then I want to see this Dr. Reeves." By mid-afternoon, they had spoken with John Peterson's mother, his father being away on business, and managed a brief conversation with Mayor Cooper about his son William. The stories were similar young men with mild stomach complaints who sought out Violet's cheaper remedies rather than the doctor's more expensive treatments, only to die shortly thereafter. "One more stop," Zachary said as they left the mayor's office. "The doctor's practice. Then we need to check something at your home if it hasn't been completely ransacked." Dr. Reeves's medical office was a neat white building with a polished brass sign by the door. A bell tinkled as they entered, and a middle-aged woman at a small desk looked up. "May I help you?" "We were hoping to speak with Dr. Reeves," Zachary said pleasantly. We're new to town and looking to establish a medical account. I'm afraid the doctor is out on calls this afternoon, the woman replied, but I can schedule you for tomorrow morning if you'd like. That would be fine, Zachary said. Although while we're here, perhaps you could answer a question for us. We've heard about the unfortunate deaths of those young men. Such a tragedy. Did the doctor treat them before they died? The receptionist's expression turned guarded. I'm not at liberty to discuss patients' medical histories, sir. Of course, Zachary backpedaled smoothly. We're simply concerned about the quality of medical care here, what with opening a business and possibly relocating our families. The woman softened slightly. Well, I can assure you Dr. Reeves is an excellent physician, Harvard-trained. Those poor boys were beyond help by the time they were brought here. It was that Zimmer woman's poisons that killed them. So they were brought here, after seeing Miss Zimmer. The receptionist hesitated, seeming to realize she'd said more than she intended. I really couldn't say more, sir. Now, shall I book you for tomorrow morning at 9? Zachary declined politely, saying they would need to check their schedule first. Outside, he and Violet exchanged meaningful glances. She just confirmed the boys were brought to Reeves after they fell ill, Violet said quietly as they walked away. But why would they go to him if they couldn't afford his services in the first place? Another piece of the puzzle, Zachary murmured. Now, let's see if we can get to your home without being noticed. Violet led the way through back alleys and side streets until they reached a small cottage on the edge of town. The door had been broken in and never repaired, and it was clear from the state of the interior that the place had been thoroughly searched. What are we looking for? Violet asked, surveying the wreckage of what had once been her home. Any of your remedies that might have been left behind. Anything the sheriff might have missed. They searched carefully, Violet fighting back tears at the destruction of her possessions. Books had been torn apart, furniture overturned, her mother's precious china smashed on the floor. Zachary, she called suddenly from the small back room that had served as her workroom. Look at this. He joined her, kneeling to examine what she had found beneath a fallen shelf, a small vial that had rolled into a crack in the floorboards. This isn't mine, Violet said, turning the tiny glass bottle in her hand. It was empty but had a distinctive amber color and a small label that had mostly been scraped off. Only the letters Gita remained visible. Zachary took it, holding it up to the light. Part of a word could be digitalis. Foxglove extract, Violet said immediately. Highly toxic in large doses, used medicinally for heart conditions in very small amounts. Would you have had this in your home? She shook her head emphatically. Never. I know how dangerous it is. I would never risk keeping it where it could be mistaken for something else. But a doctor would have it, Zachary said slowly, for treating heart patients. Their eyes met in the dim light of the ransacked cottage, understanding dawning simultaneously. We need to get out of here, Zachary said urgently, pocketing the vial. Now. They slipped out the back door just as voices approached from the front of the cottage. Crouching low, they made their way through overgrown gardens until they reached the cover of a neighboring orchard. The sheriff, Violet whispered, recognizing Sheriff Holt's voice among those now searching her cottage again. Someone must have seen us. Or they're just being thorough, Zachary replied, though he didn't sound convinced. Either way, our disguises won't hold up to close scrutiny. We need to leave town. But we're so close, Violet protested. That Violet's evidence. It's a start, nothing more. We need proof that Reeves administered digitalis to those men and why. Zachary took her arm, guiding her through the trees toward the road that would lead them back to the hotel. We'll get our things and leave before nightfall. But as they approached the hotel, Violet grabbed Zachary's arm. The doctor, she hissed. He's coming out of the hotel right now. They ducked behind a wagon as Dr. Reeves emerged onto the street, speaking with the hotel clerk. The clerk was gesturing animatedly, pointing in various directions as if giving directions or describing something. He's looking for us, Zachary muttered. Our disguises didn't fool everyone. What do we do now? Zachary's mind worked quickly. Change of plans, we go directly to the sheriff. The sheriff, Violet stared at him in disbelief. The man who wanted to hang me. the man who was doing his job based on the evidence he had, Zachary corrected. If Reeves is behind these deaths, the sheriff needs to know. He's not our enemy, he's just another victim of whatever game Reeves is playing. Violet wasn't convinced, but she trusted Zachary's judgment. They circled around, avoiding main streets until they reached the sheriff's office. To their relief, it was empty except for a young deputy who was clearly new to the job, judging by his nervous handling of the keys as he locked the gun cabinet. Zachary removed his spectacles and straightened to his full height, instantly transforming back into the commanding Texas Ranger. "Deputy," he said firmly, "I need to speak with Sheriff Holt immediately. It's a matter of life and death." The young man jumped, his hand moving instinctively to his gun before recognition dawned. "You're that Ranger, the one who took the witch." "She's not a witch, and right now your town is in danger from the real killer. Where is Sheriff Holt?" He's out at the Zimmer woman's place with some of the men," the deputy stammered. "Said someone reported seeing strangers there. Send for him," Zachary ordered. "Tell him Ranger Zachary Owens has evidence about the Miller, Peterson, and Cooper deaths. We'll wait here." The deputy hesitated only briefly before nodding and hurrying out. As soon as he was gone, Zachary locked the office door. "We're not really staying here, are we?" Violet asked, removing her bonnet. "No, we're borrowing the sheriff's office for a few minutes." Zachary moved to the desk, rifling through papers. "The sheriff will have reports on the deaths, possibly even Dr. Reeves's official findings." They searched quickly, Violet keeping watch at the window while Zachary went through the files in the sheriff's desk. Finally, he found what he was looking for: 3 death reports, each signed by Dr. Harrison Reeves. "Look at this," he said, spreading the papers on the desk. All 3 reports cite toxic plant poisoning as the cause of death, but there's something strange about the symptoms described. Violet examined the reports carefully. "These symptoms, they're consistent with digitalis poisoning, not with any of the remedies I gave them. The dilated pupils, the slowed heart rate, the blue tinge to the lips and nails, it's classic foxglove toxicity." Zachary nodded. "Which means Reeves either made a deliberate misdiagnosis to frame you or he poisoned them himself and used me as a scapegoat," Violet finished. "But why? What could he possibly gain from killing these young men?" Zachary gathered the reports. "We need to find out," and quickly before the sound of approaching horses interrupted him. Through the window, they could see Sheriff Holt and several men riding toward the office at a gallop. "Too late to run," Zachary said grimly. "We stand our ground, show him the evidence, it's our only chance." Violet moved to stand beside Zachary as the footsteps approached the locked door, then stopped. There was a moment of silence, followed by the sheriff's voice, Ranger Owens. "I know you're in there. Open up before I break this door down." Zachary unlocked the door but stood protectively in front of Violet as the sheriff entered, followed by 2 deputies with guns drawn. "You've got nerve coming back here," Sheriff Holt said, his weathered face hard with anger. "I've got evidence," Zachary countered, holding up the death reports and the empty vial. "Evidence that Violet Zimmer is innocent and that Dr. Harrison Reeves is your real killer." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then, to Violet's surprise, Sheriff Holt signaled his deputies to lower their weapons. "Let's hear it," he said. "All of it, and it had better be good." The next hour was spent in intense discussion as Zachary and Violet laid out their theory and the evidence they'd gathered. Sheriff Holt listened with growing concern, occasionally asking sharp questions that revealed a keener intellect than Violet had given him credit for. "So you're saying Reeves poisoned these boys with digitalis, then sent them to Miss Zimmer knowing her remedies wouldn't help so he could blame their deaths on her?" The sheriff rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "But why? What's his angle?" "That's what we need to find out," Zachary said. "But first, we need to protect Violet. She's still in danger as long as Reeves thinks she might expose him." Sheriff Holt considered this, then nodded. "Jenkins," he said to one of his deputies, "escort Miss Zimmer to my home. Tell my wife to keep her there and not to open the door to anyone but me or the ranger here." Violet started to protest, but Zachary placed a gentle hand on her arm. "It's the safest place for you right now," he said quietly. "I need to know you're protected while we confront Reeves." The look in his eyes' concern mingled with something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name silenced her objections. She nodded, allowing the deputy to escort her out. Once she was gone, Sheriff Holt turned to Zachary with a grim expression. "If you're wrong about this, Ranger, I'll have your badge and then I'll hang that woman." "I'm not wrong," Zachary replied evenly, "and when we're done, you'll owe her an apology." They set out for Dr. Reeves's office, only to find it closed for the day. A neighbor informed them that the doctor had mentioned heading to the Donahue Saloon for his evening whiskey, a habit, apparently, that the respectable doctor indulged regularly despite his cultivated image. The Donahue Saloon was crowded but quieter than the Double Cross, catering to a more affluent clientele. Dr. Reeves sat alone at a corner table, a glass of whiskey and an open ledger book before him. He looked up as Zachary and Sheriff Holt approached, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness. "Sheriff, what can I do for you?" His eyes narrowed as he recognized Zachary despite the lack of disguise. "And who might this be?" "Texas Ranger Zachary Owens," the sheriff said before Zachary could respond. "He has some questions about those boys who died, the ones you said were poisoned by the Zimmer woman." Reeves closed his ledger book deliberately. "I've already provided official reports." The cause of death was clear toxic plant poisoning consistent with the so-called remedies that woman was peddling. "Interesting," Zachary said, taking a seat uninvited, "because we found this in Miss Zimmer's cottage." He placed the empty vial on the table between them. Digitalis. Foxglove extract, not something she would have had, but certainly something a Harvard-trained doctor would keep in his supplies. Reeves's face remained impassive, but Zachary noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. "What exactly are you implying, Ranger?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. The symptoms those boys exhibited were consistent with digitalis poisoning, not with any of the herbs Miss Zimmer used in her remedies. And you were seen socializing with all 3 victims at the Double Cross Roadhouse before their deaths, something you failed to mention in your reports." Now genuine alarm flickered across the doctor's face. "You're making wild accusations based on hearsay and an empty bottle that could have come from anywhere. Sheriff, surely you're not taking this seriously." Sheriff Holt's expression was unreadable. "I take the deaths of 3 young men from prominent families very seriously, Doctor. And right now, the Ranger's theory makes as much sense as the idea that a woman who's been healing folks in this town for years suddenly decided to murder 3 boys for no apparent reason." Reeves laughed, a brittle sound. "No apparent reason. Those boys were troublemakers, constantly harassing her, calling her a witch behind her back. Everyone knew it." Zachary and the sheriff exchanged glances. This was new information Reeves shouldn't have had if he wasn't closely connected to the victims. "And how would you know that, Doctor?" Zachary asked quietly. "Did they tell you that during your drinking sessions at the Double Cross?" Reeves realized his mistake too late. He stood abruptly, knocking over his whiskey. "This is absurd. I have patients to attend to." Sheriff Holt blocked his path. "Not just yet, Doctor. We're going to continue this conversation at my office, and I think we'll be taking a look at that ledger book you were so quick to close." For a moment, it seemed Reeves might try to flee. Then his shoulders sagged, and a different kind of calculation entered his eyes. "You don't understand," he said, his voice lowered. "Those boys were going to ruin everything. The youngest Cooper boy found out about my arrangement with certain ladies in town. Threatened to tell his father if I didn't give him free treatment for a particular ailment he'd picked up at the Double Cross. Then he told his friends, and they wanted the same deal." "What arrangement?" the sheriff demanded. Reeves looked away. "I've been helping some of the married women in town with certain feminine problems. Unwanted conditions. For a fee, of course." Understanding dawned on Zachary. "You've been performing abortions." "A medical procedure," Reeves corrected stiffly. "One that is sometimes necessary but not openly discussed in polite society. The women needed help. I provided it discreetly, until those boys found out and threatened to expose me. It would have ruined me, destroyed my practice." "So you killed them," Sheriff Holt said flatly. and framed an innocent woman for it. I gave them a painless death, Reeves replied, a desperate edge to his voice. And that Zimmer woman was the perfect scapegoat. Everyone already thought her remedies were suspicious. It was simple to add digitalis to their drinks at the roadhouse, then send them to her with complaints that matched the early symptoms. By the time she tried to treat them, the poison was already working. Zachary's hand moved to his gun, but Sheriff Holt was faster. In one fluid motion, he had Reeves's hands behind his back and was securing them with handcuffs. "Harrison Reeves, you're under arrest for the murders of Thomas Miller, John Peterson, and William Cooper." The sheriff's voice was hard with disgust. "And for the attempted murder of Violet Zimmer through false accusation." As they led Reeves away, Zachary couldn't help but think of Violet, waiting at the sheriff's home, unaware that her name had finally been cleared. The thought of telling her, of seeing relief replace the fear that had haunted her eyes for so long, filled him with a warmth he hadn't expected. It was well past midnight by the time the formalities were completed. Reeves was locked in a cell, his full confession documented by the sheriff's clerk. Word was already spreading through town, and by morning, everyone would know that the respectable doctor, not the healer woman, was responsible for the tragic deaths. Sheriff Holt walked with Zachary to his home, both men tired but satisfied that justice had been served. "I owe you an apology, Ranger," the sheriff said as they approached his modest house. "And Miss Zimmer as well. I was too quick to believe the obvious explanation." "You were doing your job with the information you had," Zachary replied. "The important thing is that the truth came out before an innocent woman was hanged." The sheriff's wife, a kind-faced woman with graying hair, met them at the door. "She's in the guest room," she whispered. "Poor thing fell asleep hours ago, first real rest she's probably had in days." Zachary nodded. "Let her sleep. We can tell her everything in the morning." But as he turned to leave, planning to find a room at the hotel, the sheriff's wife stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. "You could wait in the sitting room if you like," she offered. "I've got coffee brewing, and I imagine you might want to be here when she wakes." Zachary hesitated, then nodded his thanks. He settled into a worn armchair, accepting a cup of strong coffee. The sheriff's wife brought him a blanket before retiring to her own room with her husband, leaving Zachary alone with his thoughts. He hadn't intended to doze off, but exhaustion claimed him eventually. He woke to the soft gray light of dawn and the sensation of being watched. Opening his eyes, he found Violet standing in the doorway, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her green eyes fixed on his face. "It's over," she said simply. "The sheriff's wife told me." Zachary straightened, setting aside the blanket. "Yes, Reeves confessed to everything." "Your name is cleared." Violet moved into the room, sitting on the edge of the sofa across from him. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft with emotion, "for believing in me when no one else would, for risking everything to help a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore," Zachary replied, the words coming from someplace deep and true within him. They sat in silence for a moment, the first rays of sunlight beginning to filter through the lace curtains. "What will you do now?" Zachary finally asked. Violet looked down at her hands, considering. "I don't know. My home is destroyed, my reputation," she sighed. "Even with Reeves's confession, there will be people who still believe I'm a witch, people who won't trust me to heal them anymore." "You could start fresh somewhere else," Zachary suggested, though the idea of her leaving sent an unexpected pang through his chest. "With your skills, any town would be lucky to have you," she nodded slowly. "Perhaps, and you." Back to ranging across Texas, solving mysteries and saving damsels in distress. There was a lightness to her tone, but her eyes held a question that made his heart beat faster. "Actually," he said carefully, "I've been thinking of settling down. Finding a place to call home after all these years on the move." "Have you?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Zachary stood, moving to sit beside her on the sofa. "Violet," he began, then paused, gathering his courage. "When I saw that gallows being built for you, something happened to me. Something I can't explain. I knew I couldn't let you die, not just because it was wrong, but because I needed to know you, to understand the woman who faced death with such courage." Violet's eyes glistened with unshed tears. And now that you know me. Now I can't imagine riding away and never seeing you again. He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I know it's sudden. I know we've only had a few days together, and most of that time we were running for our lives. But in those days, I've come to admire you more than anyone I've ever met. Your intelligence, your compassion, your strength. A tear slipped down Violet's cheek. What are you saying, Zachary? I'm saying that if you're starting fresh somewhere, I'd like to start fresh with you. He reached up to brush the tear away with his thumb. I'm saying that when I told those townspeople, cast your spell on me alone, I didn't realize how true those words would become. Violet laughed softly, more tears falling now. I told you I have no magic, don't you? Zachary smiled, his heart in his eyes. Then how do you explain what's happened to me since I met you? Before she could answer, he leaned forward and kissed her gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded, her hands moving to his shoulders, then his face, then tangling in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, they remained close, foreheads touching. I love you, Violet Zimmer, Zachary whispered. Witch or healer or simply the bravest woman I've ever known, I love all of you. And I love you, Zachary Owens, she replied, her smile radiant through her tears. My protector, my champion, my heart. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony in the garden behind the new home they'd purchased on the outskirts of Austin. Sheriff Holt and his wife made the journey to witness the union, as did a handful of people from Gonzales who had come to offer apologies and well wishes to the woman they had so gravely wronged. Violet established a new healing practice, gaining respect and trust from her neighbors through her knowledge and compassionate care. Zachary took a position with the Austin Constabulary, using his skills to solve crimes and keep the peace without the constant travel of his Ranger days. On quiet evenings, they would sit together on their porch, watching the sunset and talking about the strange twist of fate that had brought them together, how an accusation of witchcraft and a desperate gamble by a Texas Ranger had led to a love neither had expected to find. You ever regret it? Violet asked one such evening, 5 years later, as their young son played in the yard and their infant daughter slept in her cradle nearby. Saying those words that day, cast your spell on me alone, Zachary smiled, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. Only that I didn't say them sooner. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Zachary and Violet Owens sat together in the life they had built, a life founded on truth and trust, on courage and compassion, and on a love that had indeed cast its spell on them both, binding them together as surely as any magic could. The years passed with a sweetness neither Zachary nor Violet had dared to hope for in those first desperate days. Their children, James and Emma, grew strong and bright, with their father's courage and their mother's healing touch. The Owens home became known throughout Austin as a place of warmth and welcome, where those in need could find help, and those who offered harm would find justice. As their 20th anniversary approached in the spring of 1893, Zachary surprised Violet with news that he'd purchased the land adjoining their property land, where she could expand her garden of medicinal herbs that had become renowned throughout the county. You spoil me, she told him, her green eyes still as bright at 45 as they had been at 25. No more than you deserve, he replied, his dark hair now streaked with silver at the temples, but his smile unchanged. Besides, I have selfish motives. The more people you heal with your remarkable knowledge, the fewer problems land on my desk at the constabulary. Their laughter mingled in the afternoon sunlight, a harmony built from 2 decades of shared joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching 16-year-old James teaching 11-year-old Emma to throw a lasso, Violet leaned her head against Zachary's shoulder. You ever think about how differently our lives might have turned out? She asked. If you hadn't ridden into Gonzales that day, Zachary's arm tightened around her waist. I try not to. The thought of what almost happened to you still wakes me sometimes. She turned to study his face, tracing the lines that time had etched around his eyes. I was thinking about Dr. Reeves today. Do you know what became of him after the trial? Last I heard, he was still serving his sentence in Huntsville. Why do you ask? Violet sighed, her expression thoughtful. I received a letter from Gonzales yesterday. Mary Cooper Williams' mother has passed away. It made me think about all of it again. The accusations, the fear, how quickly people can turn on someone different. And yet, look at you now, Zachary said with pride. The most respected healer in 3 counties. People come from all over seeking your knowledge. Because you gave me the chance to prove myself. She leaned up to kiss him gently. You cast your own spell that day, Zachary Owens, a spell of faith and second chances, he laughed softly. If that's magic, then I'm glad to be a sorcerer. Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Violet voiced the thought that had been growing in her mind for several months. I've been thinking of taking on an apprentice, she said, her head resting on Zachary's chest. Someone to learn the healing arts to carry on the knowledge. Emma, Zachary asked, his fingers idly stroking Violet's hair. Perhaps if she's interested when she's older. But for now, I was thinking of Sarah Wilkins. You know, the young woman who lost her mother last winter. She's been helping me in the garden, and she has a natural affinity for the work, a healer's instinct. Zachary smiled in the darkness. You see something of yourself in her. I do, Violet admitted. She's bright, compassionate, and alone in the world as I once was. I think she could do a lot of good with the right guidance. Then you should teach her, Zachary said simply. Pass on your gifts just as your mother did to you. Violet was quiet for a moment, then said softly, Sometimes I wonder what my mother would think of the life I've built. If she would be proud. She would be beyond proud, Zachary assured her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. How could she not be? You've saved countless lives, raised 2 wonderful children, and somehow managed to reform a footloose Texas Ranger into a respectable family man. Violet laughed, the sound vibrating against his chest. That last part was my greatest achievement, surely. As they drifted toward sleep, Zachary found himself reflecting on the strange and wonderful path that had led him to this moment. How the darkest day of Violet's life had become the beginning of his greatest happiness. How words spoken in defiance of a fearful mob had somehow prophesied the deepest truth of his existence. She had cast her spell on him, this remarkable woman. Not with potions or incantations, but with her courage, her wisdom, her unwavering heart. And he would happily remain enchanted for all the days of his life. In the warm Texas night, as the moon shone through their window and cast silver light across their entwined figures, Zachary and Violet Owens slept in the peace of a love that had withstood false accusations and true dangers. A love born in the shadow of a gallows but nurtured in the light of truth and trust. A love that had, indeed, proven more powerful than any magic.